Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to go over how I made the music videos for Stories of the Mind. This is the album I released last year together with some music videos, so today I want to go over how I actually made those music videos. Now there is going to be some custom software that I used for this. I'm going to leave a link to the GitHub page for that in the description. But also if you just want to get the quick download for the exe file, then that's also just going to be on the GitHub page. Okay, so diving in, this is After Effects. This is an animation program made by Adobe and this is used for usually smaller time animations, smaller length animations, not something that is done for very long stretches of time. Usually there are better options for longer time videos like these ones here, which are a couple of minutes long. But After Effects to me was the one that was the easiest to work with because there's a lot of content online. There's a lot of tutorials that go over how the software works and a lot of different effects that people are able to create within After Effects that I wanted to apply to the video. So hence why I chose this software. Hey guys, I quickly wanted to say that my second masterclass is out now on my Gumroad. It's about 24 hours of edited footage of me making the track that you're listening to right now. So go check it out if you're interested. Now this isn't going to be a comprehensive overview on what I did within After Effects. I'm not going to go over every single effect that's on there and stuff like that. If you want to start using After Effects, I highly recommend getting some dedicated courses or tutorials for the software itself because it can be quite a complex piece of software. But with all of that out of the way, let's actually have a look at the project. So each of the songs has its own project, and within every project there's going to be differences that make it so that the song and the music video really sync well together. That was the whole idea behind the music videos. I wanted them to be synchronized, so when something happens in the music, it is reflected in the video. So here we are in the main composition that is used for all of the animation. This is where I'm building up the animation, and then we have a final chop here where I'm taking that animation and just putting it in the final video, but the main animating part is happening here. You can see that there's a lot of layers in here where I have a lot of ball layers, which are all of these little ball things here, the ones that are like transparent and the ones that are sitting here. Having those on individual layers allowed me to move them independently, so that was very, very nice. We have some other layers here as well, which are the skulls, for example. This is the left skull, and then here we have the right skull that you can turn off and on. The way that this was done is I had this artwork commissioned by somebody and he sent over the Photoshop file, which allowed me to export individual layers for each of the components that I needed for this video. Now there's various effects on here, and unfortunately I cannot play you the video in real time because of the rendering time that it would take, and while I'm recording that's just not really possible. So if you want to know what the music video actually looks like, I unfortunately cannot show it to you here, but you have to go and actually listen to the songs and look at the videos there. But I can give you a few different examples of things that we're doing. So for example, here on the left skull, we can go over the effects quickly and just kind of go through what is happening here. So we have a radial blur, which is a type of blur that happens from a point. So you can imagine that there's a point in space. I think in this case it's just the center point, and lines are drawn out from that point, and anytime it intercepts a pixel and you turn up the blurriness, it's going to kind of blur out in the direction away from the point that you've selected. We have this other radial blur here, which essentially does the same thing, but they're used in different circumstances in different cases. We have a glowing effect, which adds a nice kind of glow to the pixels here and makes it look like they're lighting up or kind of on fire or something like that. We have a displacement map, which is used for glitching effects. So this allows me to displace parts of the image by a certain amount depending on the color of the pixel that is used in the map. For that we have a noise map, which looks like this. It's just a bunch of noise that I'm generating, and depending on the color that is behind the pixel, it's going to move it up, down, left or right. So you can imagine every single square of the video is going to be moved to a different spot, creating a very cool glitchy effect. Finally, we have this magnify effect here, which is going to make the skull kind of swell up and become bigger. This is used for when the kick drum hits in the track, and I'm doing some really cool calculations to automatically calculate the magnification amount depending on the BPM and whether the kick is playing or not. So essentially, if you want to do something like this, what you'll need is you'll need a piece of artwork which has a bunch of layers that you can extract, preferably something like a Photoshop file, or just get sent the layers to you by the artist that is making it. Once you have that, you need to arrange them within your After Effects project and set them all up so that they form the artwork that you want to create, add all of the effects that you want to add, all of the little details that you want to add, And then you want to think about variations. So for the variations, you can see a lot of the effects aren't really doing anything. The magnification is at 100, which means that there's no actual magnification going on because this is a percentage value and 100% is just the normal size. You can see the maximum horizontal and vertical display are also 0, meaning that the displacement map isn't doing anything. Our glow isn't doing anything with an intensity of 0. And both of these radial blurs aren't doing anything. Again, you can see that by the amount being 0. But you can also see that these numbers are red. And that means that there's an expression actually controlling these amounts here. In fact, each of the values that you see in red are actually being kind of controlled by these expressions. Now, if you're not an After Effects user, you might not know what expressions are, so I'm going to quickly run you through a bunch of different expressions and show you some examples of how I'm actually using expressions to change certain values of all of these parameters. So we're once again in the left skull here, so that's this object right here, and we're looking at the same effects as we're seeing above here. So you can see that these copy one to one. We have the radial blur, CC radial blur, which is this one. If we scroll down more, we get to the glow, which is here, and so on and so forth. And you can see that all of the parameters are copied one to one, with the red ones controlled by expressions. So you can see what I'm doing here in the expressions is I'm just using the kind of programming or scripting language that is included to calculate the values that I want for the parameter. Now, I'm not going to go over the math, but I can give you an example here. For this amount here, we're using some kind of period, which means that we're going to create an oscillation. What you can see is that we have the time divided by 4, and this is just the time in seconds. And then we take the remainder of that from the period. So you can see that the period is just going to be the length of our oscillation in seconds. Finally, then we do a whole bunch of other kind of calculations to get to the exact value that I want. Now, it's really hard for me to explain this because this is something that I built up over a couple of months. And there was a lot of different experiments, a lot of different tries. The basic way that I started out was with a template. So I created kind of this template project where I did all of the effects and stuff in before I actually went on to the song. That way I could just duplicate the project a bunch of times until I had one for every song. And I could just lengthen the actual project, make sure that it was long enough to cover the whole song. And this was a very, very lengthy process because, as I said, I cannot really play it within the project here. Now that I have a new PC, it goes a lot better and it's a lot faster to actually play it. But when I was making this, I still had the old PC. So it would take an immensely long time to actually render out all of the frames and all of the effects that I'm applying. So the way that I would do it is I would start with my template, create kind of like a test template where I showcased all of the different effects playing in different times and combinations. And that will make a little bit more sense when we talk about how I'm actually controlling the effects. But I created this kind of base template that showed me all of what the different effects were capable of producing, and I rendered that out, and then I was able to go through and make notes on what I wanted to change and stuff like that. So there was a lot of back and forth rendering it out for overnight and then checking what I actually had to change, which of the expressions were actually at fault for something like a detail or something like that. So it was a very, very long and tedious process, and I don't quite remember what all of the math is doing, but that's not the point. The point is that if you are going to do something like this, then you need to know this kind of scripting language, and there's tutorials that you can find for that as well. And you need some kind of approach to actually producing all of the videos that you want to make. So you might see that we're taking a lot of values here from this kind of slider, discom layer controls effect intensity slider. And I want to talk a little bit about what this actually is. So there's a way for one element to control a different element in After Effects, and that's what we're doing here. If I scroll up to the top of the project, you can see this layer controls here. And on this controls layer, I have a bunch of different sliders. And sliders are just objects that can hold a certain value. And you can animate that value. So as you can see for each of the values here, we have a bunch of different keyframes, which are basically like automation points of where the value needs to be at a certain point in time. And then it's just going to interpolate between all of the points and it's going to move the slider accordingly. I've set myself a range between 0 and 100. So 100 is maximum value and 0 is minimum value. That way all of the sliders were kind of standardized. And once I had them within each individual expression, I was able to then take that and have a 0 to 100 value for each of the different controls that I wanted to use. So for example, I had this setup called intensity. Intensity was going to show you how much energy was in parts of the track, and the more intense something was, the more intense some of the effects were. So I needed the intensity variable here to actually indicate what the intensity of different parts were. And you might see that I'm not actually using that in here. The reason for that is maybe I used it in the past and I decided against it. As I said, this is a long and evolving project, so there were a lot of different decisions made. Maybe this was supposed to go in there and it ended never up happening, or I did decide to put it in there and didn't like what the effect looked like, so removed it again. There's a bunch of other ones. We have this kick here, which tells me whether the kick is playing or not in any point in time. We have this variation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we're taking here, for the period, we're also taking the BPM. So you can see the actual slider that it's using in here. This effect BPM is showing me that it uses this BPM slider, which is set to the BPM value of the track. Now with this BPM, what we also create is the kick reaction. If you've seen the music videos, you'll see that some of the elements kind of zoom in and out depending on when the kick is playing. Anytime a kick drum plays, there's this kind of bouncy effect of the whole animation kind of popping up in your face and then moving back again very, very quickly. And that is done here with this magnification. You can see now the value is slightly different than 100. And again, we're using a whole bunch of different variables here to create a period and an amp in this case. And the way that we do it is we basically create a ramp within here that's going to go up with the BPM, right? So that's a ramp that is synchronized to the BPM of the track, which means that with our kick drums playing on the beat, it's just going to react to the beat. So what that means for the whole project is that there's a whole bunch of different effects with a whole bunch of different expressions that all kind of trickle down into being controlled by just a bunch of sliders here, where the actual values are being placed, the animation values. Now this may seem very, very nice because then you only have to set up and animate a couple of values instead of the hundreds that you would need to do if you didn't use the expressions, if you wanted to just animate each parameter individually. But it's still a very, very tedious task to actually manually animate all of this. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to animate this within Ableton instead of within After Effects. The reason for that is within After Effects you're no longer in musical timing, you're in frames per second. And that's just a division of the second within equal steps. Now you can imagine that BPMs and FPS don't really match in the sense that there's no easy conversion that you can do to take one from the other. And especially if you're animating stuff to the beat, you would need to constantly listen to the beat, see where in time something is, and then add your point in here. And you would have to do that for each individual point within the track. And then you would have to do that for all of the different sliders as you can see here. So that would be very, very tedious to actually accomplish. Now say that we had something like this, which is an Ableton project. Here what I can do is I can just import whichever project that I'm working on. Currently it's the track number 2, The Dreamer, and I can set up different points in time without any curvature in this case. But you can see what is happening is that all of these points are synchronized to the music. You can see that the beat is synchronized here. You can see that this lines up with the timing here. We have another part where it lines up with the timing. And that's just because I can set this project BPM to the value that I wanted to. So this is what I used to draw out the animations that I wanted all of the keyframes to do. Again, I didn't have an exact preview of what was happening here, so there wasn't an easy way to just do this one time. I had to go in, do it the first time, and then note down all of the things that didn't work for it, and then come back and make changes. So there was a few times where I had to go back and forth to actually see what is happening and what we were doing, how the animations were actually looking. But overall, this made it a lot easier to animate if there was a way to convert from one to the other. Now, one of the things that I noticed pretty early on in working on this project is that if I take some keyframe animations like this, hit Ctrl C, and then go into a text document, you can actually just paste them in there and you get a formatted version of the actual text that it used to contain the keyframe data. So what that meant to me is if I were able to generate this text, I would be able to copy that text from somewhere else and then paste it within the After Effects project. I would be able to paste it in right here. In fact, if I take some keyframes here, you can see that this is the text that it uses to represent. And I can now go in here, have the two sliders selected, Ctrl V, will paste it in there. So what that meant is if I wanted to have this bridge, this connection between Ableton and After Effects, I would need a program to convert from one to the other. And there wasn't really such program out there, so I decided to code up one of those programs myself. This is Visual Studio Code. This is the program that I created. I can scroll through the code, but it's not going to be interesting because you don't really need to know the code if you want to use this. Now, as I said before, there is going to be an exe file available. The only reason why I'm really showing this is just to show you that it's like part of the process. And it's also the way that I open up the application myself. So I go in here and run it, and then I get the application here. From here, I can open up the file that I need to use. So in this case, it's going to open up the Dreamer project. And I can hit the process here. I can set BPM and the FPS that I'm working in. So 60 FPS here. I can set minimum and maximum values for the keyframes that it's going to use, and I can have it normalize it. What that will do is it will take the automations and make sure that they hit the 0 and the highest point. If we go back into the project, if all of these animations, for example, were set lower so that they don't go to the highest point, for example, like this, where none of them hit 100%, it's just going to take the highest point from the automation and regards that as 100%. And while we're here, I should probably say that what I'm using to actually draw these automation lines is just the tracks with the dry wet of a delay. That was chosen at random. You just need a parameter that is being automated to be able to be detected by the software. But you can see for each one we're using a delay with a wet on it. And then the track name is going to show you what parameter we're actually automating here. So with that all out of the way, I can hit process. That will give us all of the automation lanes in here. And then I can select which ones that I want to include within the list of keyframes that it's going to generate for me. So I can select this one, I can select this one, or I can select all of them or deselect all of them. Let's just select all of them and then I hit convert, and it will just give me the information as keyframes data. As you can see here, I can just Control A and copy that. And then I would just go into the project here and paste it down. Obviously I cannot do that right now because there's already stuff in here and that would just create a mess. But hopefully you get the idea of how the conversion was done. So all of these parameters, as I say, control different aspects of the music video. For example, here we have the intensity. I talked about the intensity before. It's just an indication of how energetic a certain part of the track is, and different aspects of the animation changed based upon that. We have the build here, which is handy whenever you have a build up in your track. This just adds a little bit of extra energy and it makes that very bright in your face kind of feeling that you see in the build-up of all of the videos. Again, I'm not able to show it here what the effect actually looks like, but you can see them within the actual music videos themselves. We have the kick amount, which makes the beat react to the kick or not. You can see if I go into the Ableton project that this is just an automation where the kick is on when the kick is playing within the track. And whenever there's a fill or a little break or something like that, the kick animation is just completely gone. You can see right here it's also moving down. That's because there's a high pass filter here, and then here there's just no kick at all. And then we go back into the drop, so the kick is back again. We then have the 3 different variations. There's a bunch of different variations within the track. This is just to make the video a little bit more interesting, not have the same animation over and over again. So there's different effects that are being used to give certain parts of the track some extra glow. Certain parts of the track have changing colors. Certain parts of the track have a little extra brightness or a little bit extra shine to it. And all of that is controlled by the 3 variations right here. We also use a glitch effect every now and again, and that glitch effect is just copied in here. This is just a small spike that is being used to trigger the effect. And this glitch effect is what's responsible for triggering all of those displacement maps that I talked about before with the noise. So it's all very, very complex stuff, I know, and it's really hard to explain it in a way that is easy for people to understand. Hopefully I did my best. The last thing that I want to say is if you want to dive in and experiment with this for yourself, what you can do is just get the exe file here. Alternatively, there's also the whole project, so all of the code is in here that you can use. One of the things that I want to use this software for is to have other functionalities that you can apply on Ableton projects. For example, it would be nice to have a software that looks through an Ableton project and just finds all of the plugins or all of the effects that are being used, and maybe some other things as well that are handy. For that reason, it is up on GitHub if you want to look through the code. If you have anything that you want to do, maybe with Ableton projects or After Effects stuff, then you might be able to use this code as a jumping off board to actually see what is going on and how that I'm using it. Unfortunately, I didn't do my best documenting everything. I probably should make some documentation. As I said before, the code isn't really well documented because the plan was always to just use this as a one-time off, but I can see that this is very, very helpful for people because I spent a lot of time actually looking for a way to do this, and when I found out that there wasn't a way to do this, I decided to actually code it. I should have thought a little bit more about documenting before I would release it to the public, but I now want to just get this video out as soon as possible, so I might spend a day later on actually documenting all of this code, and then obviously the GitHub page will update accordingly. So that's everything that I wanted to say about the music videos. I hope that you found it interesting. It's a little bit of a behind the scenes of how this all works. If you have any questions about the whole process or you want to learn more about this, then you can leave a comment in the comment section down below. If you're new here and you like what you're seeing, if you like my explanations, then make sure that you're subscribed. I post usually about music production, and specifically about psytrance. So this is a little bit of a one-off video. I'm not usually in the animation space, but I hope that you still found it interesting. But that's going to be the video. I hope you enjoyed and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.